Hi, my name is Maham Naveed, and I currently serve as the chair for Lawfare and International Law at the Islamabad Policy Research Institute. Today, with us, we have Ambassador Asif Durrani. Ambassador Durrani is a career diplomat, and he has served in India, Kabul, Tehran, New York, London, and UAE. Thank you, Ambassador Saab, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Ambassador Saab, today we are going to talk about the Day of Neutrality. So, the United Nations on the 12th of December designates that day as the Day of Neutrality, where what the UN does it celebrates states who choose to be neutral in armed conflict. And I think a lot of people are confused as to what that means and want some clarity on it. So, I think उसके ऊपर मेरा first question आपके साथ ये होएगा कि for countries जो ये कहती हैं कि in an armed conflict between two states and a third country says that we are neutral in an armed conflict between those two states, as a diplomat, and what do you feel and what do you think about the actions of those states?
Mahan, one is the international neutrality declared by the states, such as Turkmenistan. And once upon a time, Switzerland had declared neutral during these First and Second World Wars. Helsinki enjoyed this status for a great amount of time. But now, Switzerland it joined the European Union, and it also has now forces. As so has Norway. They have done it, and now they'll be part of the NATO. So their neutrality has gone. Turkmenistan, in fact, if you look at the Central Asian states, so they had problems. Tajikistan had problems with Kyrgyz Republic, with Tajikistan. Tajikistan also had problems with Kyrgyz Republic. And so, in that respect, when you look at Turkmenistan, so they declared almost it's 25 years that they declared themselves as completely neutral, which means that in this neighborhood, if there are certain disputes, they'll adopt a neutral stance. They will not side with any of the country, or, for instance, at the international level, if there are certain disputes, so they would want to be neutral rather than siding with one party or the other.
But, sir, do you feel like with states being neutral, with other states being neutral, does that help de escalate conflicts? Because that's what the UN promotes, that the less states that get involved and remain neutral, it helps localize the conflict.
At least these three examples I have quoted, they in fact had benefited from adopting a status of neutrality. So Turkmenistan has also benefited from that. But how long, you never know, because sometimes circumstances change. So you really don't know what will happen in future.
And sir, the United Nations recently, within the umbrella of neutrality, has started advocating for mediation as a method of peace building. It says that neutral states, while remaining neutral, should mediate between states that are in conflict. So, what do you feel, and how effective, as being a diplomat, and I'm sure have being part of a lot of mediation efforts yourself, how effective do you feel like mediation by third countries or by international organizations is in de-escalating conflicts?
Maham, it depends again about the situation, how it evolves. Right now, say if there's a dispute between Russia and United States, so who would be those countries acceptable to both the countries as mediators? That you have to determine which, for the time being, it's difficult. But yes, there are certain vibes that Turkey has been playing a role of a mediator, which Turkey, in fact, negotiated uh, sale of Ukrainian wheat to outside world, and but by and large, it's politics, and primary uh, objective of the United Nations was to establish peace and security. But you see that the larger countries or major powers, or especially the veto wielding powers, in fact, they have been promoting their own agenda. And in that context, if you look at it, when in 1945 UN Charter was adopted, soon after the adoption of the Charter, the world plunged into a Cold War, which only ended in the 1990 after the breakup of the Soviet Union. And that created the blocks. So the question of neutrality, in fact, got compromised, and no real, you can say, mediation took place in a big way. For instance, we were a facilitator between China and the United States, which in fact culminated into Secretary of State Henry Kissinger's maiden visit to China. And before that, a number of you know shuttle missions took place, uh, which Pakistan's diplomats conducted between Beijing and Washington. Um, but we did not play the role of a mediator. We were a facilitator.
Facilitate. Okay.
So you have to distinguish between that as well. But of late, when in 2016 in Iran, Saudi embassy was burnt after the killing of Shia leader Sheikh Nemar in Saudi Arabia. Saudi embassy was burnt down in Tehran. Consequently, Saudi Arabia broke its ties with Iraq, and there was high tension in the Gulf region. Um, Pakistan tried to play the role of a mediator, while Iran accepted Pakistan's role. Saudi Arabia was reluctant. However,
Okay.
ultimately, it was Iraq which, in fact, entered the fray and then conducted or facilitated talks between Iran and Saudi Arabia. But still, now it is more than 2 years that these talks are continuing uh, with little success, at least for the time being. So, what I'm trying to say is that it depends the nature of conflict and the size and status of a country.
Of the country. But sir, what I've taken from your conversation is also that states are a better mediator than international organizations usually.
Not necessarily. It depends what kind of a mandate is given.
Okay.
If you give a mandate, so whether you give this mandate to a state or to the United Nations.
Okay.
But United Nations has conducted mediatory roles in different conflicts, mostly in Africa. They did that. They did that in the case of Timor-Leste. And so we just can't say that only the states can do it effectively. It all depends that how the parties agree to mediation, and then what are the modalities of that mediation, which are
Okay.
worked out, and the mandate given to the mediators.
Okay. And sir, nowadays, and we've spoken about this before, there's this concept coming about positive neutrality. Could you like tell us more about that and
Well,
what
I
that
think this
concept
this
that
concept is, in fact, that while you maintain your stance
mm,
neutral, you in fact engage both the parties
yeah,
in fruitful relationship.
yeah,
I give you example. For instance, uh, during Iran and Saudi tensions, we maintained positive
mm,
neutrality, which means that we are into an agreement with Saudi Arabia to provide security to Saudi Arabia. We have our troops in Saudi Arabia. We have been undertaking training of the Saudi armed
mm,
forces. But at the same time, we have engaged Iran, and then we have also assured Iran that our association with any of the Gulf states does not mean that we hold any brief against Iran. So this is the way you can say. Otherwise, when you enter into security arrangements, bilaterally or multilaterally, that is also given. This is according to the international law and
mm,
practices. For instance, Iran has security agreement with Iraq and Syria, which is why that in Syria, I mean, when it was almost captured by ISIS some a decade ago, it was Iranian forces, in fact, which in fact were actively involved, and they uh, played a substantive role along with the Russian air
mm,
support to retrieve the situation in
mm,
favor of President Assad.
mm. Perfect. And to like wrapping up our conversation, we've seen that nowadays we're living in a very polarized world. And we've also seen it in Pakistan's context with the China US relationship, where the polarization is to the extent that if a country is deciding to stay neutral or not saying something in one particular conflict, it can sometimes be detrimental to that particular country. So, as a diplomat yourself, do you feel like in this particular situation, in this particular geopolitical situation that we are in currently, neutrality at times is a viable or not a viable tool for countries to engage in or to use?
United States is a superpower, rather hyperpower, and it is said that United States is the neighbor of every country in the world, and China is actually a neighbor, uh, geographically a neighbor, and more than that, uh, we had best of the relationship with both the countries, of course, but with the United States there have been ups and downs. We were the most close ally of the United States, but at the same time, we also were the most sanctioned ally in our history. We had a 65 war, and United States imposed sanctions on Pakistan. We had 71 war, and United States imposed sanctions on Pakistan. India conducted nuclear tests in 1974, giving it the name of Smiling Buddha. And United States slapped sanctions on Pakistan, thinking
Mm,
that now we'll follow suit, which we did actually. But uh, so this was the attitude. Hadn't it been the Soviet intervention in Afghanistan in 1979, those sanctions would have continued. And once the Soviet entered and the situation changed, so Pakistan became the darling. And then once they left, they washed their hands. This is very much acknowledged by former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. And then same happened after the 9/11, where then again we became the darling, and now we are still the non-NATO ally
mm,
of the United States. But there have been, you know, tensions. The question is that you just cannot always follow the dictate. It all depends on what is in Pakistan's interest. When it comes to China, China is our strategic partner. Whatever industrialization we have right now, we owe it to China. and whether it is in the defense field or in the economic field. Now, in economic field, you see China-Pakistan economic corridor. It's an investment worth $62 billion, and the first phase has been completed, and now we are entering into second phase, which is first phase was about building infrastructure projects. Now we are entering into the industrialization phase of those special economic zones, 9 economic zones. Ultimately, it will be 13. So we are in that process. So, in that respect, each relationship is different in its nature, in its importance, and should not allow, and I think Pakistan will not allow United States to force us to choose between China and United States, and we should not allow ourselves to come to this pass whereby we have to choose between the two. Because with China, we have a different relationship. It's the most trusted friend. About United States, this is my personal view. We cannot say that United States is the most trusted
Just,
friend.
yeah. Great. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us today and for removing a lot of ambiguities regarding a very complicated topic that's taking rounds in political and international circles. I hope you found our conversation engaging and informative, and we hope that you'll join us for future sessions. Thank you.